everyone, I hope you've been having a wonderful week. I'm looking forward to catching up in this video because I have a lot of books that I've been reading lately that I haven't had a chance to review or to tell you about, and I've been a bit under the weather this week, so I've really had to stay home this week, and I've also been working on some projects that I'm hoping to launch this spring. So this has been a bit of an odd week for me, and I'm having to actually film this video on Sunday itself. So I thought the best thing to do would be to have a little chat and share with you the books that I've been reading. There are some real gems that I've come across in February and just right at the beginning of March, so I'm excited to share these recommendations. First of all, I read quite a lot of romances in the month of February for obvious reasons, and one I really enjoyed is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. This was such a great read. I don't normally pick up much fantasy, and I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this. My mum had read it and recommended it to me, and actually this is a great sort of romance, but it's also a really good mother-daughter story, so it was nice to be recommended this book by my mother. And with Mother's Day in the UK coming up, I would really recommend this one as a gift to a mother or to a mother figure in your life, obviously especially if they like fantasy. But even if fantasy isn't really your thing, I have to say I did enjoy this. I loved all of the Chinese mythology that's woven into this story. It's about a young woman who is the daughter of the moon goddess, and her mother has incurred the wrath of the celestial emperor and his wife. So she is in fact a prisoner on the moon. And the fact that she has a daughter isn't widely known amongst the immortals. And the daughter ends up having to run away, and she by chance becomes the companion to the celestial emperor's son. But there in this household, she gets to have the opportunity of learning how to use her own innate sort of life force or magic, and also to become a member of the army and to work her way up to becoming a person that is well respected and very powerful. And her aim through all of this is to somehow secure her mother's safety. There's romance interwoven in this story, but I really enjoyed the fact that the romance wasn't as predictable as is so often the case in this type of book. It definitely takes some unexpected turns in the story. This is a book about love, but it's also a book about betrayal, and ultimately it really is a book about female empowerment, and I found it a really inspiring as well as gripping read, and I loved the author's imagination in this story too. Just little details about how, for instance, if someone has a strong life force or kind of innate magic, then this is often reflected in the clothing that they wear, and the embroidered cloth will almost come to life. So if it's embroidered with butterflies and someone has a strong life force, then the butterflies will sort of flutter across the silk and things like that. Just these little details, but they added a lot of world building to the story and really kind of immersed you in this world. And I just loved that, and it was a very imaginative book, so that was something I really enjoyed and highly recommend. I'm looking forward to the second book in the series, which is on my bookshelf, so I will be reading that soon. And then I read Miss Bunkle Married and the Two Mrs. Abbotts by D.E. Stevenson. So this is the second and the third books in the Miss Bunkle trilogy. You may remember we read Miss Bunkle's book, that's the first one in the series, last February for the Comfort Book Club, and this February I took advantage of the Persephone Valentine's offer and I ordered a couple of their books so I could get the pretty matching napkins that was part of their Valentine's offer. And then when I'd ordered them, I just picked them up and kind of couldn't resist reading them again. It had been a long time since I read Miss Bunkle Married and the Two Mrs. Abbotts, and I really enjoyed returning to these. Miss Bunkle Married especially, I really loved reading again. I like it, I think, just as much as Miss Bunkle's book. It's a really strong sequel. Barbara Bunkle is such a fun character, and here you see her settling down into her married life, making new friends, and really sort of coming into her own, and I really enjoy it. The Two Mrs. Abbotts is a bit of an odd book in some ways, though I really loved that Sarah, who's the doctor's wife in Miss Bunkle's book, makes a reappearance in this one. It's really quite a small reappearance, but she is there at the start and she's such a favourite character. It's fun to see her again. But this is a World War II book, and war is definitely at the forefront of this novel. It's a lot less about Miss Bunkle, more about other characters and friends of hers. And it's not as strong a book. I think it really is the weakest of the three. I still enjoyed it a lot. There's another female novelist that's kind of in disguise in this one, and there's a bit of a romance that happens in this book too, although I think it's the weakest romance of the sort of three books. But I still recommend it. If you like the other two, then it's definitely worth reading the third in the series, but it isn't my favourite, so I definitely recommend the other two more. And then of course I read The Nun Search for the Comfort Book Club in February. It was really fun to return to this favourite Georgette Hare novel of mine. I do love her Regency romances. They're always just witty and fun, and I love that this one is set in Yorkshire. And it features a favourite heroine of mine, Ancilla, who is the sort of grand old age of 25 or something in these novels, so practically on the shelf already, and is working as a governess, and she has to take care of an extremely bratty young woman who is very beautiful and very wealthy, but also very willful and selfish. But the Nun Search himself arrives from London in Yorkshire, and of course romance happens, and it's just an entertaining read, so I really enjoyed returning to this one in the month of love in February. And then another light romance I read was The Agency for Scandal by Laura Wood. I do enjoy Laura Wood's YA books. This is her latest one, and I think it's the first in what is going to become a series. The next one is meant to be coming out next year, so that's exciting because I really did enjoy the characters in this book, and it's fun to know that this is kind of going to progress into a series. The premise is really fun. It's about a sort of secret society of women who work together to protect other women in trouble, essentially. And they do this by sometimes devious methods like blackmail, pickpocketing important documents, but it's all very light-hearted and fun. So that was just a really sort of quick, light read that I enjoyed. And then another book I read in the sort of Regency romance genre is A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin. And this, I think, is a debut novel, and I enjoyed it. It was quite light and fun. It was definitely entertaining, and it was a witty read. Not as funny as some of the Georgette Hare books that I liked, but I still really enjoyed returning to the world of Regency romance, and I thought that this was pretty strong. It's got a much more of a modern heroine. It's about a young woman called Kitty who is determined to marry for money because she has 4 other sisters that she has to provide for. Their parents have just died, and she really feels it's her responsibility to make sure that her sisters don't starve, and she sees her only option as to how to do this is to marry someone with money. So she travels to London in time for the season. This book actually starts at the end of February and goes through sort of March and April, so it's actually quite a nice springtime read. And once Kitty arrives in London, she meets a very wealthy family and she determines to marry the younger son. But the older son sort of sees what she's up to and puts a few spokes in her wheel. But it's just quite fun. Of course, romance develops in the end and there is a satisfying ending to this. I would have liked some of the secondary characters to be fleshed out a bit more. Some of them are really barely fleshed out at all, but there is meant to be a sequel to this. I think this is the first in a new series, because at the back I noticed that it says, if you loved A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting, don't miss the new Lady's Guide novel making a grand entrance in spring 2023. So there obviously is going to be a new one in this series coming out soon. I'll have to look that up, and maybe that will flesh out some of these characters that really didn't get much of a chance to shine at all in this book. So I'll be intrigued to see that. But if you want something fun and light and entertaining, then I would recommend this. And then I read a really powerful Novella Reunion by Fred Ullman, and this was just such an impactful book. I spoke about it quite a bit on the channel before, so I won't say too much now, but this is just a sort of book that will always stay with you once you've read it. It's about a young boy growing up in Germany in the 1920s, 1930s, and his friendship with another boy, and how the rise of Nazism in Germany at that time puts a huge strain on their friendship. It's a very difficult book to read in many ways, but the last lines in the novel are just so impactful, and they do give you some feeling of hope at the end of it. It's very moving. I think it's very hard not to cry at the end of this book, but it's just an exceptional novella, and I wanted to read it in February because I was sort of celebrating short fiction in February, and I'm so glad that I picked this off my shelf. I really, really recommend reading this one. And then I've also been reading quite a few Catherine Mansfield short stories, again in celebration of short form literature. She's such an amazing short story writer. She really was a master of the genre, of that sort of form of fiction, I should say. And reading her short stories has just been amazing. They're sort of very wide ranging, but she just was, just a master of the short story. So I've been really enjoying reading more of hers. And then I've read some children's books as well. So I read a couple of books that have been republished or about to be republished by Girls Gone By publishers. I take photos for their Instagram account. So I reread Jerry Goes to School by Eleanor Brent Dyer, which I really enjoyed returning to again. I loved these books when I was a child. I loved her Chalet School books, but this is the first in the La Rochelle series. And it was really fun to return to this one. It was, I think, Eleanor Brent Dyer's very first book, but it has some of her hallmarks already in this. Like there's a dramatic rescue from sort of death by drowning when the ice cracks on a lake, and there's a feud between two girls, which in the end it all gets sort of worked out. So definitely some EBD hallmarks in this one. And then I also read Stepsisters for Lorna by Eleanor Brent Dyer. And this is the sequel to Lorna Wynyards, and Girls Gone By are about to republish this one. So it was fun to return to this too. It's not as strong as Lorna Wynyards, but I still enjoy the sequel. She does borrow a bit of a plot device from What Katie Did in this novel, but she references that book in the story. And it ends with a really charming Christmas scene too in this one. So I really enjoy that aspect of it. So it was fun to read those. And then I got this new book that has been republished by another independent publisher called Grey Ladies. They also produced The Scribbler, which is a literary magazine I really like. And they republish books that are by women writers, mainly from the interwar years, that are now sort of, for the most part, forgotten. They republished, for instance, a lot of the Susan Scarlett books. Susan Scarlett was a pseudonym of Noel Stratfield, and they republished all of those ages ago. Those are now republished by Dean Street Press, but they did a lot of that type of book. This is their most recent one, A World Within a School by Lucy Kinloch. And I thoroughly enjoyed this. I mean, this was originally published as a children's book, but as Hilary Clare says in the introduction to this, it really reads like a school story that is actually written for adults. It's so much more nuanced than most school stories of that time period. I think this was published in the 1930s, and it's a sort of book, if you like Antonia Forrest, for instance, I think you would probably really enjoy this one. But it's just a very interesting take on a school story. It examines sort of very close friendships are formed in school, but how those friendships can both strengthen or diminish your own personality. And in the end, it's a book that's about the strength in standing for what you yourself believe in, and and for having your own independence as well, and how that's an important lesson to learn in school. I really enjoyed it. I read it very quickly, and I found it such an interesting take on the school story, and really very well written. So yeah, I highly recommend that one. And then I read a little bit of non-fiction as well in February. I read The Game of Hearts, The Lives and Loves of Regency Women by Felicity Day. This was a companion read, really, to reading The Nun Search and diving into a lot of Regency romance genre in February. And I'd picked this one up when I was in Bath in December, and it felt like the perfect book to read in February. And it was fascinating. I absolutely loved it. In this book, Felicity Day really looks at the real women who were part of the sort of upper echelons of London society in the Regency age. And she looks at what writers of the Regency romance genre get right and what they get wrong about the lives of these women, and how they married, who they married, why they married. And there are definitely some revelations that come up in this book. And I found it a really interesting read, thoroughly enjoyed it. Some of the women I wanted to go on and learn more about, and that's always wonderful when a book kind of sends you off wanting to do other research and to learn more, and this definitely did. So I thought it was an excellent read, and if you're interested in that era, or if you're interested in Regency romances and you want to learn a bit more about the reality behind this genre of fiction, then I would really recommend this. It's not too big, it's very sort of accessible, but it just gives you an interesting overview on this topic. So yeah, I really recommend this one. And then I haven't quite finished this, so I'm going to leave a review for when I've really finished this. But I have also been enjoying this biography of Catherine Mansfield, which I find interesting because it also really looks at a lot of her short stories too. So I've been really enjoying this, but I haven't quite finished, as I went a bit off-piste in February and ended up reading some books I wasn't expecting to read, but yeah, really enjoying everything, which was nice. So I'll review this once I've finished it. And then at the moment, what I'm reading is two Slightly Fox books that the team at Slightly Fox very kindly sent me. I'm reading True to Both Myselves by Katrin Fitzherbert, which is a really brave memoir about Katrin's experience growing up as a child in Nazi Germany, her father being a Nazi, and then her sort of mother leaving her father and sort of fleeing Germany, I think just after the war, and her sort of upbringing in England, and her having to come to terms with her past and also with her present, and in leaving her father behind and in realizing who she was, but in somehow trying to reconcile these two pieces of her history. It's a very interesting, very brave memoir. I've just started it, so it actually goes back to the story of her grandmother and her marriage to a German, and how and what sort of pressures her grandmother went through in the UK when there was so much xenophobia expressed towards Germans in World War One, and why her grandmother ended up having to leave the UK because she was married to a German and go back to Germany. And all of this history within the family of being split between Britain, between Germany, and the traumatic history that went on through all these three generations of women. So I'm finding it a really interesting read, really enjoying it so far. And then something quite different but very enjoyable too is A Countryman's Spring Notebook by Adrian Bell. Slightly Fox previously published a collection of Adrian Bell's articles under A Countryman's Winter Notebook, which I really enjoyed, and they've just brought out this Spring Notebook, which again is a collection of articles that he originally wrote for the newspaper. But they make really delightful reading. I thought I would just share the first couple of lines about March from his first essay in praise of March. He says, "March is a sharp word, brusque and bracing like its month. January, February, they meander like rivers. April is like the sound of raindrops on the window pane, but March is a gust of wind flinging grit." I absolutely loved that, and I think that gives you a little taste of his writing and how wonderful it is, and it's a perfect book for those who love seasonal reading. I find that reading this, just an article or two, every other day, I'm really enjoying it, and it just makes me appreciate the coming of spring even more as I sort of read this. So I'm thoroughly enjoying this one as well, and I'm looking forward to just kind of reading it gradually over this season. And then I've also been reading some literary magazines. So obviously I mentioned Slightly Foxed. This is their new spring issue. And this is such a great literary magazine. It always introduces me to new books. For instance, I read a really great article in this one about The Custom of the Country by Edith Wharton. And that's an Edith Wharton I've never read before, but reading about it in here made me so want to get it and to read it. So I have got it, and I'm looking forward to reading that one, hopefully soon. But yeah, really always enjoy the new Slightly Foxed. And then there's also a new The Scribbler, which is another great literary magazine. This one is especially good if you're interested in children's books and vintage children's books, as well as backlisted adult books, because they do a real mix of the two, which I really appreciate because I am interested in vintage children's books. So always fun to get The Scribbler, and I've been enjoying this one a lot as well. And then I just got the new The Simple Things magazine. So this is my kind of Saturday morning read. I love to get a cup of tea and sit with the new Simple Things and start to dip into this. It's just always a really fun read. And again, it's a lovely sort of seasonal magazine, which I very much enjoy. So that's what I've been reading, what I'm reading at the moment. I hope you've enjoyed these recommendations. Let me know if any in particular appeal to you and what you've been reading over February and the start of March. I'd love to hear what books you've been enjoying lately as well. But thank you for watching. Extra big thanks to those of you who pressed the super thanks button on my last video, and thank you for all your supportive messages as well. I really appreciate appreciate all of your support, and I hope you've been having a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you again next Sunday after hopefully a calmer and healthier week for me. So I'm looking forward to catching up again then. Goodbye.